Exposed: How an unexpected cliff dive in Santorini transformed my life. A touching rescue revealed. Jake Thompson stood at the edge of a precipice, the wind tousling his hair as the sun draped its golden light over the shimmering Aegean Sea. This was supposed to be a moment of liberation, an escape from the soulless grind of corporate strategies that had consumed his 35 years in New York City. But as his heart raced in a mix of thrill and anxiety, uncertainty crept into his mind. Would this leap bring him clarity, or was he only plunging deeper into the void? The reality of the past weeks clawed at him. Laid off suddenly during a harsh corporate downsizing, Jake struggled with feelings of worthlessness. He felt trapped in the memory of conference calls and sterile office spaces that steamrolled over his small-town roots. How had he strayed so far from the laughter of family game nights back in Pennsylvania? The pressurized walls of ambition had suffocated his joy, leaving him emotionally detached. Taking a deep breath, he hesitated for just a moment. Should he jump? The thrill of the dive pulsed through him, yet doubt lingered like a quiet whisper. The ocean below promised adventure but also risks he had ignored. His mind flickered back to his parents, the sacrifices they made to nurture his dreams. What would they think of him now, throwing himself into the unknown? Before he could second-guess himself again, Jake launched off the cliff with an uneasy mix of determination and fear. The rush of air enveloped him, exhilarating and terrifying all at once. But then disaster struck, an unexpected wave twisted just below him, and he miscalculated his entry. Panic seized him as a crushing weight pulled him under, darkness closing in, suffocating any shouts for help. His heart raced erratically, gasping as he fought against the cold embrace of the sea. Just as he felt himself losing the fight, hands reached through the murky depths and grasped his arm. A local fisherman, Nikos, pulled him up with surprising strength, breathless beneath the sunlit sky. As Jake regained his composure, he found himself on a craggy beach, overwhelmed by the reality of what had just transpired. Nikos' wise eyes held stories of struggles and triumphs. In the days that followed, sitting on that same beach, the two engaged in deep conversations, sharing burdens, laughter, and life's meaning. Nikos spoke of family, loyalty, and choices that shaped one's path, each word etching deeper into Jake's fractured spirit. Yet outside this tranquil bubble, the shadows of his old life loomed ominously. A startling call from an old colleague shattered the fragile peace he'd found. A whistleblower opportunity had emerged, tempting him with the promise to expose the utterly unethical practices of the very company that had betrayed him. Jake faced a moral dilemma: vengeance against the corporate giants or an embrace of the integrity that his family had bestowed upon him. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Jake's breath quickened, an internal storm brewing within him as he grappled with his identity. He felt moments of clarity washed away by waves of despair. Could he return to the relentless world of corporate ambition without losing the values his parents instilled? Just as he began to set his course, the urgency intensified with news of an unexpected betrayal, one from a friend-turned-foe, a rival at the company, who knew of his dilemma and sought to undermine him. As his phone buzzed with urgent news, Jake stood on the edge of yet another metaphorical cliff. Knowing he must choose wisely. Would he continue the fight for power or lose himself in the tides of revenge? The decision hung heavy in the air, and with it, a realization dawned: everything he once believed he wanted was slipping away. Would he rise to meet the challenge or succumb to the darkness encroaching around him? Jake sat on the beach, the sun sinking lower in the sky, casting an orange hue across the water. The quiet from the waves crashing was a stark contrast to the tumult inside him. He could still hear his colleague's voice, explaining the whistleblower opportunity, swirling in his mind like a whirlpool. What began as an escape had now morphed into a crossroads, and his heart was a relentless drum echoing the growing urgency of his decision. Nikos sat nearby, carving a piece of wood. His hands moved deftly, and Jake envied that confidence. This simple act seemed to ground him in a way that Jake struggled to find himself. How could one man be so sure of his place while Jake couldn't even decide what the right path was anymore? As if sensing Jake's turmoil, Nikos glanced up, his expression one of soft understanding. Sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we fight with ourselves, he said, pausing to look at Jake. What does your heart tell you? Jake's mouth went dry. The question struck a chord. Could he afford to care about ethics when his life had just been dismantled? But returning to the corporate world, fueled by anger and revenge, felt equally destructive. The lure to expose the unethical practices of his former employer gnawed at him, promising a rush of vindication, yet it also festered a darker part of him. He imagined calling out names, exposing deeds, and while it filled him with a sense of power, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was just repeating cycles of pain and resentment. You're hesitating, Nikos continued. Decisions like this need clarity, not anger. Jake nodded, but he felt lost. He hadn't made any meaningful decision in years. Corporate life had conditioned him to be reactive, to follow orders, to strive for validation from others instead of from within. But what if this moment were different? What if he could channel his experience back at that company into something that aligned with his core values? He had the knowledge and insight to drive change. Could this be a chance to reshape his life by rejecting that which had caused him so much distress? The ocean is a merciless teacher, Nikos remarked, breaking his train of thought. When you swim against its current, it will exhaust you. But if you find a way to ride it, you will discover your strength. Jake stared out at the horizon, his mind racing. Inside, he felt a flicker of determination ignite a realization that he was not just a victim. He had insights gained from years of working in the industry, knowledge that could dismantle false narratives. But instead of vengeance, perhaps he could rebuild. He could expose the truth but do so from a place of integrity, not bitterness. As he processed this realization, the shadows began to lift. Embracing joy, family, and integrity felt more valuable than any revenge, which would only breed more hate. Slowly, he began to form a plan, combining Nikos' wisdom with his own experiences. This was not merely about harming the company, it was about advocating for the truth and rectifying wrongs for those still caught in the corporate inertia. But just as clarity started to form, a chilling thought crossed his mind. What if his rival wasn't finished with him yet? Jake could sense the storm brewing. His foe wouldn't easily give up on the advantage, especially knowing Jake was grappling with his conscience. The stakes were higher than ever, and amidst the newfound determination lay the lurking threat of confrontation. As night enveloped the beach, he knew the time for decisions would soon arrive, and when it did, he would be ready to face not just his old demons, but perhaps his greatest adversary yet. In that moment of reflection, a plan began to burgeon within him as he turned to Nikos, seeking further guidance. Would he have the strength to stand tall when all was at stake? The sound of the waves faded into the background as Jake locked eyes with Nikos, searching for assurance. Nikos looked back, his gaze steady, reflecting the strength Jake now yearned to embody. In that moment, Jake wasn't just a man feeling the pull of the tides, he was on the cusp of transformation. I need a plan, Jake said, the words emerging from him with an urgency he hadn't felt in years. One that's not just about getting back at them but rather about doing something good. Nikos set his carving tool aside, leaning in slightly as if to lean into Jake's newfound resolve. Start with what you know. Take that knowledge and turn it into something constructive. This isn't just about exposing wrongs, it's about building a future that others can believe in. The idea resonated deep within Jake. Could he transform his corporate experiences into a way to help others? A part of him craved the spotlight, but it was paired with a burgeoning desire to create real change. Together, truths and restoration emerged as the dual priorities in his mind, a hybrid plan distanced from both revenge and passivity. I've been working in that environment for so long, he continued, internal ideas crystallizing. I know the loopholes, the unethical practices. But more importantly, I understand how to appeal to the people who will listen. I can draft a comprehensive report that outlines the truths and suggests pathways for better practices. Nikos smiled, the pride evident in his eyes. Greatness does not always come from loud actions. Sometimes it is the quiet truths that create the greatest impact. Jake took that in and felt a weight shift within him. He could be the calm in the turmoil, the advocate for change rather than the instigator of chaos. Yet, he also knew the path wouldn't be without risks. He'd have to confront those who might retaliate, like his rival, whose shadow still loomed over him like a persistent dark cloud. Will this be enough? He asked, a voice of doubt creeping in. Will they listen? That question is only part of the journey, Nikos replied, standing to stretch his legs. But it begins with your strength, not just in your actions but in your beliefs. Your integrity can compel others to listen. Inspirited and invigorated, Jake crafted a timeline in his mind, each step meticulously laid out. He envisioned meetings with former colleagues, allies perhaps in this unexpected crusade. He sensed hesitation, but the undercurrent of excitement was too fierce to overlook. Yet, even as his plan formed, apprehension brewed. Who would support him when the tight-knit corporation had ridden on complicity for so long? He wondered how much danger was he stepping into, and if he would have allies when he needed them most. As if echoing his thoughts, the distant sound of a car drove past the beach, its headlights illuminating the darkening sand. Desolation and hope collided as his internal tension mounted. A strategic mind engaged, he knew he needed to secure a foundation of support to validate his claims. Tomorrow, Jake said aloud, determination flooding his tone. I'll start by reaching out to my former coworkers. It's time to break the silence. Nikos nodded approvingly, yet a flicker of concern shone in his eyes. Take care, Jake. The truth you pursue carries weight, one that can shift currents. With that, Jake stood up, feeling taller, more purposeful. The heart that had rattled with confusion began to beat in time with his newfound commitment. He could feel the tendrils of doubt loosening their grip, though shadows still darted around him. Jake glanced back at the ocean, the waves continuously crashing as if mirroring the battle within. He didn't know what awaited him on the morrow, but a sense of inevitability washed over him. One thought lingered: the confrontation he sensed was just beginning, and soon he would need to rally colleagues who might share his desire for change. But beneath that bright vision of working for the truth lay an unsettling reality. What if his rival was already 5 steps ahead? How deep did the threat run? As he began to walk away from the beach, one certainty emerged in his heart: he had to prepare for the confrontation that awaited him, for the battles ahead wouldn't just test his resolve but also determine whether he could finally redefine himself or be consumed by old shadows. The morning sun broke over the horizon, casting a warm golden hue across the coastline as Jake sipped his coffee, his mind racing through the plan he had sketched out. Each sip steeled his resolve, the bitterness of the brew mingling with the determination brewing within him. Today was a day of confrontation, not just with others, but with himself. He glanced at his phone, hesitating for a moment before scrolling through his contacts. So many faces flashed before him: familiar colleagues, old allies who had been intertwined with him in the corporate web. Each name represented a risk. Would they stand with him, or would they turn their backs? He recognized this as part of the labyrinth of his own making, filled with shadows of past decisions, loyalty, fear, ambition. Would they remember the Jake they knew, or would they see him as a traitor looking for vindication? With resolve, he punched in the number of his former assistant, Clara. She had often been the moral anchor in an otherwise turbulent world. As the phone rang, anticipation and anxiety coiled in his stomach. When her voice finally came through, he felt a surge of relief. Clara, it's Jake, he began, fighting to keep his voice steady. I need to talk. It's important. The conversation unfolded like an old map, navigating through memories and shared experiences. Clara listened patiently to his outline of the corporate injustices, her silence a testament to the gravity of the revelations he was sharing. When he reached the conclusion of his pitch, he could hear a small gasp on the other end. You really mean it? You're going forward with this? I have to. I can't stand by any longer knowing what I know, Jake admitted, the weight of his decision combining with the liberating relief it brought. I'm not just doing this for myself, I want to expose the truth for everyone who has suffered under their practices. Clara's voice took on a steadier tone. If we're going to do this, we need more than just talk. We need hard evidence. When are we meeting? The moment solidified Jake's resolve. He had an ally. Their meeting was set for later that afternoon, a chance to hash out details and devise a strategy. In the ensuing hours, however, doubt coiled around him anew. What if the corporation got wind of his intentions? What if they moved to silence him before he could even begin? Jake pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on what they could do to ready themselves. He recalled the files, the documentation of unethical practices he had gathered over the years, hidden away in a corner of his mind. It was time to unleash those memories, not just as weapons but as building blocks for a safer future. As he set out toward the cafe, the salty breeze offered some comfort, mingling with his growing sense of purpose. Yet, he felt the weight of hesitation press upon him anew as sharp reality dawned. In reaching for justice, he was casting stones into an ocean swarmed by unseen currents. They were vast, and what if what he unearthed caught the attention of his rival, the very man who had orchestrated much of the corruption? What if this path laid waste to relationships he once held dear? Arriving at the cafe, he spotted Clara at a corner table, her brow furrowed as she reviewed files on her laptop. The comfort that was supposed to accompany his growing mission felt tenuous, as though any misstep could unravel what they intended to achieve. The familiar faces at this gathering place now resembled potential eyes scrutinizing his every action. Jake took a deep breath, confident steps converging on the table. For every moment of doubt, a flicker of empowerment ignited within him. He wasn't merely confronting a corporate entity, this was a fight for integrity, for his future self. Ready to get started? He asked Clara, masking his vulnerabilities with a determined smile. But in the back of his mind, a looming question remained: would they indeed be able to gather enough evidence before the tide shifted against them? As they immersed themselves in discussions, Jake sensed an impending storm. Brewing, ominous and unpredictable. They might be stepping into an arena where they had the most to lose, and before he realized, the confrontation he had felt creeping closer felt imminent. The moment had arrived. Now, Jake would face not just the corporation but the magnitude of the treachery woven into his past, and suddenly, the stakes felt perilously high. Jake settled into his seat across from Clara, her laptop screen glowing softly between them. She had an air of determination, but he could see the flicker of concern in her eyes. It mirrored his own uncertainty about where this path might lead. This was not merely a quest for justice, it was a reckoning with his choices, challenges, and loyalty. "Let us start with what we know," Clara said, her voice steady. She opened a folder filled with documents, evidence he had long neglected. As he scanned the pages, memories came flooding back, an unsettling reminder of the systemic rot he had once been part of. It was uncomfortable. Did he merely turn a blind eye, or had his ambition dulled his moral compass? "Here," he said, tapping a page filled with discrepancies: excess budgets, fraudulent expenditures, reports redacted to hide the truth. "This is just the tip of the iceberg. We need to dig deeper." Clara nodded but looked up, studying his expression. "But are you prepared for the fallout? Things won't just change, there'll be resistance, backlash. You know that." The words hung heavy in the air. Jake swallowed hard, his resolve wavered but didn't break. "I can't keep quiet. The thought of sitting idly, knowing more people could suffer it just feels wrong." Yet a nagging voice reminded him that a battle of this magnitude could cost him dearly, perhaps making him a pariah in the corporate world. They strategized, laying out a plan wherein Clara would contact former employees willing to contribute testimony while Jake would gather more documents that hinted at deeper malfeasance. Each step they framed out felt like moving on a tightrope. One miscalculation could send them tumbling into chaos. Hours slipped by as their dialogue oscillated from hopeful ideas to stark realities. In the midst of sharing resources and insights, Jake discovered something within himself, a talent for discernment he had forgotten. Where once he chased accolades, now he found clarity in the pursuit of truth. His instincts sharpened, guiding decisions with a precision that felt oddly empowering. Could this revelation be part of his transformation? With newfound focus, he dove deeper into his past, recalling his interactions with high-ranking officials whose actions had once appeared benign. I need to think like them, he murmured more to himself than Clara. What would they do to cover this up? The realization hit him that he had navigated those waters for years. He understood their motives, their fears. He just had to redefine his perspective and turn the ship in a new direction. Jake? Clara's voice snapped him back to the moment. You okay? Yeah, he replied, forcing a smile. Just thinking about the next move. But behind that smile was a tangle of anxiety and excitement. The confrontation loomed closer, and he felt both the thrill of justice and the gut-wrenching fear of what kind of retribution awaited. As they wrapped up, Clara leaned closer, her tone more earnest. Whatever happens, remember why you started this. Don't lose sight of the bigger picture. It's about more than just the two of us. He nodded, but doubt creased his brow. Was he truly ready to expose not only the facades he once protected, but also the parts of himself that had allowed it to fester? That night, sleep refused to come. Every shadow danced on the wall like a specter, reminders of choices he wished he could erase. Boundless possibilities and paralyzing fears collided like thunderstorms rolling across an open field. He envisioned the people who might rally around the truth they uncovered, but he also felt the weight of the repercussions bearing down on him. Before dawn, Jake awoke, panic-stricken. The path to integrity was mired with consequences he hadn't fully considered, and now he faced the gnawing realization that the cost of honesty might be more than he was willing to pay. What if he lost everything simply for trying to set things right? With dawn's first light streaming through his window, Jake caught a glimpse of himself in the reflection, suddenly unsure. Was he truly prepared to confront not only the corporation but the fractures of his own identity? His path felt tangled, a journey of personal redemption woven tightly with the harsh realities of betrayal. As he stared at his reflection, a fierce conviction arose within him. Perhaps this wasn't just about exposing the dark, maybe it was about claiming the light he thought he'd lost long ago. The time had come to face his own shadows, but would he find strength or succumb to the darkness? The tension pulsed through him, and he knew the next phase of this battle was upon him, one that would strip bare the courage he needed to unearth the truth. The sun poured through the window, igniting a fire within Jake that wrestled with his lingering doubts. Each ray felt less like warmth and more like an insistent prod, reminding him of the choices awaiting him outside the comfort of his home. As he dressed, he envisioned today not as an ordinary day at work, but as the first day of reckoning, a shift away from complacency. When he stepped into the office, the atmosphere felt charged, palpable with the weight of secrets lingering in every corner. He was no longer the passive participant in the corporate machine, he was someone with a purpose, a force ready to interfere with the status quo. Each encounter was a reminder that he was surrounded by potential allies and hidden enemies. The realization sent an electric thrill through him. His first task was to access the secured files he had so thoroughly avoided before. With a new sense of urgency, he approached the IT department, his voice steady as he requested access under the guise of routine auditing. Inside, he felt the familiar pulse of adrenaline that came with risk. Jake had navigated this world before, but now it was laced with higher stakes. Was he ready to swim in the deep end? The files opened like a Pandora's box, revealing nearly enough corruption to fuel 1,000 exposés. His fingers trembled over the keyboard as he copied files to a secured USB drive. In that moment, he felt like a surgeon, dissecting years of concealed lies, each document a malignant cell he sought to excise for the greater good. As he worked, doubt crept back, like a shadow in his mind, gnawing at his resolve. What if his meddling exposed him first? Each download was a step further into uncharted territory, yet the growing conviction inside him was undeniable. This wasn't just any workplace, it was a domain rife with injustice that demanded unraveling. Silencing his fear felt crucial, like a lifeline thrown to someone struggling in murky waters. Clara had been right, today could bring backlash. But what awaited him in the pursuit of truth was a rare opportunity, one that might connect him with like-minded colleagues. He recalled the conversations they'd had about loyalty and integrity, acknowledging the gravity of today's mission. As he emerged from the IT room, the magnitude of his quest settled heavily on his shoulders. Walking back to his desk, he spotted Marie, a colleague known for her keen insight and experience. She stirred his curiosity, Could she share insights that would further guide his quest? Usually strained by office politics, today Jake felt a push toward honesty and vulnerability. What would it hurt to confide in her? He found her in a quiet corner of the break room, coffee in hand. "Marie," he started, his voice laced with hesitation. "Can we talk? It's a bit urgent." She turned, surprise in her eyes masked by caution. "Sure, what's up?" Jake could almost hear the thrum of conviction in his heart. "I think there's something going on in our finance department, something that could be affecting us all. I need your perspective." For a moment, he feared his words would tumble into an abyss of mistrust, but Marie's gaze quickened with curiosity. "What do you mean?" she asked, leaning in as if their conversation might unravel threads leading into greater truths. "Let's just say I've seen enough discrepancies to know something's not right. I'm looking to dig deeper and could use a trustworthy ally." His palms felt sweaty, but this felt necessary, a brave reaching out that might reflect the very transformation he sought. The way she processed his words told Jake she was weighing his honesty against the consequences. Who to trust? What path would lead him further from the constraints of corporate facade and closer to authentic action? He could feel the stakes rising, a newfound tension binding him to both the imminent danger of exposure and the fluttering hope for partnership. "Let's have dinner after work," Marie said finally, her tone shifting. "I have some thoughts that might surprise you." As they parted, that spark of potential lit something in Jake. Today could spiral into an unexpected alliance, cultivating hope. But even as opportunity glimmered, shadows danced nearby, suggesting the uncertainty couldn't remain bottled up for long. One way or another, he sensed the real confrontation was yet to come. Could the next step solidify his moral awakening, or would it thrust him into the very darkness he had feared? The answer seemed elusive, lurking just behind the curtain of his determination, but it beckoned him forward. The day dragged on, each minute a relentless tick of the clock as Jake's anticipation simmered beneath a veneer of normalcy. Conversations blurred into background noise while his thoughts raced back to the files awaiting his scrutiny, the weight of their potential impact twisted like a knot in his stomach. Was he really prepared to risk everything for the sake of truth? As the hour approached for his dinner with Marie, he rehearsed the conversation in his mind. They would need a plan, a clear strategy to navigate the murky waters of corporate deception. The prospect of laying bare the finance department's misdeeds seemed simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. He couldn't shake the fear that Marie might hesitate or, worse, disclose his intentions to those who would silence him. Finally, the clock struck 6, and Jake found himself standing outside the dimly lit restaurant, the neon sign flickering above like a beacon in the growing twilight. He took a moment to collect himself, forcing a deep breath into his lungs. He was stepping into a conversation that could either fortify his resolve or risk everything he'd built in his career. He had to convince her of the necessity of their actions, of the change that needed to happen. Inside, he scanned the crowded room for Marie, spotting her seated at a small table tucked into a corner, glancing around as if testing the atmosphere before diving in. He waved, and she smiled, a subtle invitation that felt akin to stepping onto a tightrope. "Thanks for meeting me," he said as he slid into the seat across from her, the warmth of the restaurant contrasting sharply with the tension he carried. "Of course," Marie replied, stirring her drink. "You seemed serious earlier. What did you find?" Jake hesitated, gauging the level of candor that would suffice. "You know how we've talked about the shady things that sometimes happen around here? Well, I've come across some files that, well, they paint a pretty grim picture of our finance department." "Grim how?" Her brow furrowed, and he could see the gears turning in her mind. "Fraud. Misallocated funds. It's systematic." He watched for her response, his heart racing. "This isn't just about numbers. It could jeopardize our entire team's future. I want to expose it, but I can't do it alone." Marie took a sip of her drink, contemplating his words. Every second felt like an eternity as he waited for her reply. Finally, she looked him in the eye, seriousness etched in her features. "You know going after this could get risky, right? If we're caught, it could end our careers." Jake nodded, the truth of her statement lancing through the tension that momentarily surrounded them. What concerns me most is the complacency here. If someone doesn't stand up, we're simply allowing this to fester. We'll become part of the problem. He watched as her expression shifted, the initial apprehension yielding to a sense of purpose. You're right. This is bigger than us, she said softly. If you're willing to dive into the deep end, I'm with you. As relief washed over him, a new wave of determination surged. Yet, along with that resolve emerged a disturbing realization. Their conversation had laid the groundwork for something irreversible. They were no longer just co-workers, they were emerging allies against a pervasive malfeasance. The conversation flowed more easily after that. Ideas, strategies, and potential risks were dissected like pieces of a complex puzzle. They mapped out the next steps, collecting evidence, discreet meetings, leveraging support from others who might be willing to join their cause, all critical to minimizing risks while amplifying their message. As they wrapped up, Jake's pulse still thrummed with an uneasy energy. I feel like we're venturing into something beyond our understanding. This isn't about one department anymore, it's a fight against everything this place represents. Are we really ready for this? Marie's eyes locked onto his, steady and unwavering. We may not know what awaits us, Jake, but this is the time to act. If we don't, who will? Each word echoed deeply. She was right, getting involved meant risking their careers, but failing to act meant living with the guilt of complicity. He was on a precipice, staring into the unknown, but perhaps that was the only way forward. Just then, his phone buzzed, an ominous reminder of the world beyond their conversation. An email from an unknown sender titled Urgent, You're in Danger glared at him from the screen. He frowned, sensing the gravity of their actions stirring the pot much sooner than he'd anticipated. Had they already been discovered? Would their bold endeavor become their downfall before it had a chance to bloom? The stakes were rising, and Jake felt the weight of it pressing down as if the pressure of hidden truths threatened to explode. It was clear, the fight had begun, but with confrontation looming, Jake wondered if they were prepared for the fallout that surely awaited them. The days that followed blazed by in a blur of unease and determination, each hour drawing Jake deeper into the labyrinth of corporate corruption he was now committed to unearthing. The warning email, both chilling and motivating, hung over him like a jagged cloud, sharpening his focus. He barely slept, his mind racing with strategies and contingencies. This was not merely a matter of pointing fingers, but of survival both for himself and his ambitions. During every break, he and Marie huddled in whispered conversations, their mutual resolve crystallizing with each new layer of information they uncovered. Their initial plans revolved around gathering evidence, but soon they realized they'd need allies. The risk of exposure lingered heavily, yet the bonds they forged in secret felt remarkably uplifting, almost intoxicating. They shared not just strategy, but ambition, their hopes for rectifying the injustices they had discovered. Jake's transformation rippled outward. He realized he was becoming someone who no longer accepted the corrupt status quo. He was gaining confidence, rekindling the proactive spirit that had once energized him at the start of his career. He found himself volunteering to lead meetings, presenting fabricated reports that subtly raised questions without revealing his true intentions. With every success, with every nod of approval from the higher-ups, his courage solidified. Yet, he couldn't escape the ebbing tide of anxiety that followed him home. During yet another sleepless night, he lay in bed, replaying scenarios in his mind, a tangle of possibilities unfurling like a web. What if their investigation sparked retaliation? What if their colleagues were indeed complicit and they couldn't trust anyone? The isolation factored into his thoughts, amplifying the magnitude of his choices. Confronted with these agonizing questions, Jake sought solace in the one person who could understand the stakes. He arranged to meet Marie in a park, a neutral ground far from the prying eyes of the office. The surroundings felt alive, children playing in the distance, laughter punctuating the air like hopeful whispers. But he felt detached, the weight of his secret gnawing at him. Jake, she began, settling onto a bench as the sun began to set, illuminating the park in a soft embrace. You seem restless. What's on your mind? He swallowed hard, words lodged in his throat. What if we're wrong? What if we become the targets of something much bigger than we can anticipate? Then we're prepared to fight back, she replied, her brow lifted defiantly. But you can't let fear dictate your actions. We owe it to ourselves, to all of our colleagues, to bring this to light. Remember, sometimes the risk of complacency is far worse than risking everything. Her resolve stirred something in him. As he met her gaze, Jake could almost feel the pulse of their shared mission electrifying the air. You're right, he said, determination pushing through layers of doubt. But we need to be smart. We need to create a plan that maximizes our chances and minimizes our exposure. Let us focus on gathering enough evidence that it can't be denied. As they continued to talk strategy, Jake felt a shift within himself, a realization that he was becoming a figure who confronted issues instead of hiding from them. With each decision, he was shaping not just the outcome of their mission, but his very identity. He clung tightly to the fire ignited by their shared purpose, gripped by the growing belief that they were on the verge of not just exposing wrongdoing but redefining who they were as professionals. But as they parted ways, a heavy thought loomed over him. What if their efforts drew the eyes of those they sought to expose? Moments later, another email arrived, this one from a name he recognized, a direct threat wrapped in coded language, warning him to cease his inquiries. The stakes had transformed, and with them, the urgency of their mission. Jake realized he had crossed a threshold into a world where certainty had vanished, replaced by a chasm of danger. The time had come to act decisively, but as he slipped his phone into his pocket, a new layer of conflict surfaced, driving him deeper into a realm where trust was tested and reality had turned treacherous. Would he have the fortitude to confront not only the corporate deception but also the very real threat that now loomed at his door? Jake's heart raced as he stared at the ominous email on his phone, its words twisting in his mind like a fraying rope. The message was clear: back off or face consequences. It should have filled him with fear, yet instead, it ignited a hardened resolve within him. The shadows of doubt that had danced around him now evaporated, a dual sense of threat and ambition crystallizing in his core. As he sat alone in his apartment, Jake replayed the recent events. He had entered a dangerous game, one that demanded more than just intelligence and ambition, it demanded bravery. There would be no safety net if he stumbled. He touched the warmth of the phone in his pocket like a talisman, one that carried both the burden of his choices and the potential for liberation. He recognized the weight he now bore. It was the weight of expectation, both external and internal. After contemplating for a moment longer, he fired off a quick response to Marie, asking her to meet again. This time, though, they needed to be strategic. As he planned their next steps, he felt the fierce heat of his determination morphing into a new identity. The Jake he used to be, the compliant employee who shied away from conflict, was being replaced by a person who understood the nuances of power dynamics, who could outmaneuver those who held it. Their reunion felt charged with urgency. When Marie approached him, her eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and concern. "What is going on? You look different," she said, uneasily scanning their surroundings for any potential eavesdroppers. Jake leaned closer, his voice a low murmur. "We can't just gather evidence. We have to think beyond that. We need a game plan, a way to turn the tables if we're forced into a corner." Marie's brow knitted with apprehension but quickly softened as she understood his passion. "I'm with you, but we need the facts first. We can't risk exposing ourselves unless we're sure." "Agreed," Jake replied, determination painting each word. "But let us leverage everything we have. I've been thinking about our internal networks. What if we could plant subtle hints and gauge reactions? Bait a trap." Marie nodded thoughtfully. "We need to be careful. But if we can weaken their positions or unearth dissent from other employees, we might have an edge." As they teased out their plan, Jake felt a flicker of exhilaration. The corporate environment began to feel like a chessboard, and for the first time, he saw himself as the player, not merely a piece in the game. The thrill of fashioning the angles and strategies twisted through him like a powerful current. Yet with that came the immediacy of risk. It lingered, a reminder that their quest was fraught with dangers both known and unknown. A few days later, he initiated casual conversations with colleagues, testing waters, crafting pathways to open dialogue without raising suspicion. Each encounter, a delicate dance, made him acutely aware of the information he had once taken for granted. He was no longer an observer, he was emerging as a participant in a shifting narrative, one where understanding the human psyche became just as critical as decoding corporate structures. But back in solitude, the looming threat remained at the forefront of his mind. Every tick of the clock felt like a countdown. The pressure of the unknown pushed him into a state of fevered awareness. Failure was unacceptable, not just for his professional future, but for the vision he and Marie shared. The unexpected email that had seemed like a dark omen morphed into a catalyst. He was no longer just trying to salvage his career, he was committed to confronting something much larger. The stakes weren't just about corporate ethics, they were entwined with his own identity, the essence of who he was becoming. As he navigated this treacherous path, Jake stood at the precipice of revelation. Many decisions lingered just beyond his reach, their outcomes resting precariously on the choices he would make next. He sensed the tension in the air, as if reality itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to act. Could he turn the fear that threatened to consume him into a catalyst for action, or would it bind him when he needed freedom the most? A fresh urgency surged within him, igniting a determination that overshadowed his trepidation. He was prepared to face the consequences, whatever they may be. And just as he felt this resolve solidify, his phone buzzed again, an unknown number. He hesitated before answering, his heart pounding, knowing it could change everything. What could they want? Jake took a deep breath, steadied himself, and answered the call. "Is this Jake Thompson?" a stern voice boomed from the other end. "Yes, who is this?" "Let us just say I have a vested interest in your current inquiries. You're digging where you shouldn't, Thompson, and it's time to step back." The veiled threat sent goosebumps racing down Jake's spine. But instead of panic, a surge of determination rushed over him. This was no longer just about his reservations, it was about exposing the truth. "I'm not afraid of you," he replied, his voice more confident than he felt. "If there is something wrong, I'm going to bring it to light." The line went silent for a moment. "Then, consider this your final warning. Walk away, or you'll regret it." With that, the call ended. Jake felt a precarious mixture of fear and exhilaration. The shadows had closed in on him, but instead of backing down, he saw this as a defining moment, a confrontation not just with corporate malfeasance but with every part of himself that had ever accepted complacency. Later that evening, he and Marie met at a cafe buzzing with the evening crowd. The jovial atmosphere provided a stark contrast to their spiraling tension. As they settled into a corner booth, he shared the ominous call. "They're scared, Marie," Jake declared. "We're onto something. They wouldn't threaten us unless they felt vulnerable. That's our leverage." Marie's eyes widened, processing his words. "We can't let fear drive us, but it's also a sign. We need to move fast. We must gather undeniable proof and present it in a way that makes it impossible to ignore." They finalized their plan, compiling testimonies, collecting documents, and gaining momentum through slowly rallying support. Jake felt a sense of urgency but also clarity. He was no longer just a lone agent of change, he was a catalyst, igniting a movement within and beyond himself. Days turned into a whirlwind as they gathered support. Some colleagues were fearful, cautious about their involvement, while others like Leah, the finance analyst, were eager to join. Leah had witnessed practices that conflicted with their ethics and was willing to risk her position for the cause. Together, they framed their evidence, each file a testament to the corporate downfall that had plagued them for too long. As Jake pored over their findings late into the night, he recognized the definitive transformation within himself. What began as a desperate escape from corporate oppression transformed into a battle for the truth. He wasn't just exposing a corrupt company, he was reclaiming his voice, his ambitions, and his essence. With determination coursing through him, they orchestrated a meeting with higher-ups the following week. The anxious moments leading up to it were palpable. Jake and Marie stood at the precipice of revelation, an uncharted territory where his life could change forever. The day of reckoning arrived, and as they stepped into the conference room, Jake felt solid confidence replace any flickering doubt. "Jake, Marie," the CEO greeted them, a tight smile plastered over a face flushed with unease. Jake's pulse quickened, this was it. "We've uncovered serious discrepancies within the finance department," Jake declared, projecting assurance as he placed the files on the polished table. "We have testimonies from those willing to support us." The room fell silent. The tension was electric. "If you're willing to stand against us, it could be career-ending for you," the CEO warned. "No, what's career-ending is ignoring the truth," Jake responded, his voice unwavering. "We refuse to remain complicit in a system that capitalizes on deception." Stunned faces circled him, and he realized the transformation was complete. The timid employee had stepped aside, making way for a man of integrity, willing to face the backlash. In the weeks that followed, Jake and his colleagues worked tirelessly to build their case, and slowly but surely, they began to see the company make changes, corrections rooted in ethical practices. When the investigation concluded, the results were staggering, and transparency was a new priority in corporate policy. Months later, as the sun set across the skyline, Jake sat on his balcony. The enduring weight of dread was replaced with profound satisfaction. He had battled his fears, embraced his values, and emerged as an architect of change. He achieved the recognition he once craved not through ambition but through integrity. His journey transformed not just his career, but his very self. He was resolute, competent, and anchored in purpose. With a renewed spirit and confidence, he faced an exciting horizon, one that reflected the new Jake, the man who found his voice at the edge of that cliff in Santorini. Now, he eagerly looked onward. But before closing his notebook, he felt the urge to connect with others. You need to subscribe now for powerful stories of personal transformation and triumph. Leave a like now to fuel the algorithm and help spread the message of change. Comment with your thoughts and reactions. Your insights matter. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who dare to confront their fears and transform their lives. Don't wait even one more second. Join the movement towards integrity and empowerment.